history has been made. Israel's interim verdict, the verdict on Israel's violation of the Genocide Convention, which was filed by South Africa in late December 2023, has been reached. The International Court of Justice, its verdict is historic. It is a historic defeat in many ways, especially in the realm of public relations for Israel. And the United States, NATO, Israel, none of them are going to be able to grasp their heads or grasp their hands and wrap their heads around what is about to come next. Well, we have to first talk about what happened. So, on January 26th, very early in the morning Eastern Time, the International Court of Justice convened and gave its verdict, its interim verdict on South Africa's case. And it was ruled that South Africa's case is favorable. It was ruled in favor of South Africa. This is immense. This is an immense victory for South Africa and really for the entire political and social movement that has arisen worldwide against Israel's onslaught in Gaza. And it's going to have huge geopolitical implications. So here is initially the first of many positive developments with regards to this case. Israel was attempting to have the International Court of Justice withdraw the case altogether, and here is the ruling on that motion by Israel from the ICJ.
At the stage of making an order on the request for an indication of provisional measures, the court's task is to establish whether the acts and omissions complained of by the applicant appear to be capable of falling within the provisions of the Genocide Convention. In the court's view, at least some of the acts and omissions alleged by South Africa to have been committed by Israel in Gaza appear to be capable of falling within the provisions of the convention. In light of the following, the court concludes that prima facie, it has jurisdiction pursuant to Article 9 of the convention to entertain the case. Given this conclusion, the court considers that it cannot accede to Israel's request that the case be removed from the general list.
So there you have it. The case is not going to be removed. That is not going to happen. And essentially what the court did there is state that what South Africa has brought to the court is indeed legitimate. It's very legitimate. And there is enough to continue on the possible ruling, which will come at some point in the future. But here is the provisional interim ruling. This is what the ICJ ended up enforcing or coming out with a legally binding ruling on the merits of the provisional measures that South Africa was seeking in relation to Gaza, meaning that these are the measures that must be taken from here on forward as the court deliberates on the final verdict of whether the genocide conventions have indeed been violated. So here is what the court had to say.
For these reasons, the court indicates the following provisional measures. 1. By 15 votes to 2, the State of Israel shall, in accordance with its obligations under the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide in relation to the Palestinians in Gaza, take all measures within its power to prevent the commission of all acts within the scope of Article 2 of the Convention, in particular, A, killing members of the group, B, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, C, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, and D, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. For these reasons, the court indicates the following provisional measures. 1. By 15 votes to 2.
So 15 votes to 2, the court ruled, this is overwhelming, the court ruled that Israel has to follow these provisional measures that mainly revolve around essentially stopping its genocidal onslaught in Gaza. Now, there has been a lot of debate about whether this means anything at all. And I'm of the position that it means quite a lot. So, what the court has stated is that Israel indeed needs to and must stop any actions that could be part of this case, that is part of this case in many ways. All of the things that Israel is doing, the siege, the blockade, the bombings, all of that, those are included in these provisional measures. Of course, it's legalese, it's not specified, but Israel, given its particular situation, its stature, and how Israel has been treated by the so-called rules-based international order as essentially a U.S. pet project, one that has been protected more than maybe any other so-called country in this world. This is a huge historic blow to Israel, where Israel is now under the spotlight, has provisional measures against it that are supposed to be enforced within the next month. Israel is supposed to show that it is following by these orders. And regardless of whether Israel follows them or not, which I do not believe Israel will, and I'm going to show you evidence as to why later, I don't think Israel is going to stop anything. I don't think it's on its way toward ceasing its onslaught in Gaza. But regardless, Israel does now have this following it. And we do have, through whatever international law is worth, and of course, there are major contradictions within international law itself. But for whatever it is worth, this is the best thing that you could get from such a heroic act by South Africa. Now, there is even more pressure in the realm of public relations on Israel, and there is a legal basis to condemn and to stop Israel for what it is doing. And that leads to many particular possibilities, which are unclear whether they will happen or not. But I think what matters here is that Israel now is under a kind of political pressure, a kind of world pressure, international pressure that I don't believe in its history, in really the history of modern or even historic Western empire, has ever faced. I don't think the collective West, and many would say, well, Israel's not in the West. Let's be honest. Israel is a satellite. It is a protectorate of the collective West and always has been. And it identifies itself as Western, as a Western colonial outpost. All of this is to say is that we've never seen this kind of thing happen where a country of its so-called stature has been brought to this kind of court by a much, if you think about in terms of status, protection, history, South Africa, a BRICS country, a global South country doing this. It is unprecedented in scope. So here is what the foreign minister Nerlende Pandor had to say about, the United States and Germany, go figure, are saying that this ruling is meritless, and so is Israel for that matter, and that's no surprise. Here's what Miss Pandor had to say, Her Excellency Pandor of South Africa, with regard to these comments. This is her response. And I think it's important because it spells out perhaps the sophisticated outlook that we can have on this matter.
What do you say to Germany and the United States who have called this case meritless?
Well, the fact that the court says, remember that today we're not deciding about the allegation of genocide. What we're dealing with are the provisional measures. It's clear that the court does say circumstances exist where it is plausible that genocidal acts have been committed. This, of course, means once the merit case is addressed, and if the finding is that there has been genocide, those states that have aided and abetted become a party to commission of an infringement in terms of the convention.
So basically what Pandora is saying, South Africa's foreign minister, is saying is that while a ceasefire would have been, of course, preferable in terms of the language, first of all, it was not likely that the court would rule for a ceasefire in a genocide convention, as that is not what is being ruled upon. This is the tricky thing and the problem with, of course, legal affairs. That's not what was being ruled upon, and that's not part of provisional measures. But all of what the court has ordered could be seen as, in its total package, it tantamount to an order for a ceasefire, because in order for Israel to follow these provisions, there has to be a ceasefire, and that's what Ms. Pandora is making very, very clear. But her broader point is really important, in that if Israel continues on its onslaught, now that this ruling has been made, well, now there's legal basis to take countries like Germany, like the United States, like France, all of these countries in the collective West that have aided and abetted Israel. Now they can be taken to court on the same account, leading to potentially a cascade effect that will be a public relations nightmare for the entire collective West, which already it has been. What Israel is doing has been a huge blemish on the already tattered and beaten down political, economic, global image, its stature and prestige with the global majority around this planet. So this is significant. And what what the foreign minister of South Africa, Naledi Pandor, said, I think must be taken into account as a way of looking at this, case in a manner that's more sophisticated than, well, we didn't get what we wanted. We didn't get the court to come down in Israel, throw all of the Israeli officials and their aiders and abettors into prison. We didn't get a ceasefire. A lot of people wanted a ceasefire. That didn't happen. But it's important to recognize that while this is slow, while this is taking a long period, as unfortunately all matters of Western bureaucratic functions do, it is having an immense effect already on the geopolitical situation, especially with relation to Israel's standing in the world, which is now completely and utterly destroyed. That is the historic defeat that I'm talking about, because that is a defeat. It does matter. Yes, there are people who have come to me and said, Danny, the Palestinians, tell them that there's a victory. Tell all the Palestinians are being bombed and killed. Tell the Israelis who are continuing this onslaught, they don't care about the decision, that this is some kind of historic defeat. Yes, tell each of them that this is a historic victory for the Palestinians and a historic defeat for Israel. And what I would say to this is that, well, Israel is losing their minds over this. And the Palestinian people have already made the greatest sacrifice maybe that humanity has ever made in terms of its own quest for freedom, their own quest for freedom, and the objective of independence and self-determination, which was October 7th. That was the huge sacrifice that was made. So all of this is to say is that while it's quite clear that Israel is not going to stop this onslaught, it's also clear that optics do matter, that every point where Israel or the United States or the collective West as a whole is taken down a notch through a public relations win, as well as through a legal mechanism which was once just resigned for either the enemies and adversaries of the United States or some African neo-colonial dictatorship that the United States and the collective West propped up. That it was where these courts were once reserved. Now Israel is on trial, and not only was South Africa's case affirmed, but they just scored a major victory in the proceedings of this case. So it's important to recognize all of that and have this kind of nuanced view. And here's what Ali Abunimah said, friend of the show. I'll definitely have to have him back on soon. In response, he is the editor of Electronic Intifada, a great publication. Ali Abunimah said what the South African foreign minister is saying, Naledi Pandor is saying is correct. Israel cannot stop killing and other genocidal acts against Palestinians, as the court ordered, without a ceasefire. Therefore, the order of the court is effectively an order for a ceasefire. So there you have it. That is my position as well. This is effectively an order for a ceasefire. It is an order for Israel to stop what it is doing. And so if Israel stops what it is doing, which I don't believe that's going to happen, then we would essentially have the equivalent of a ceasefire. But here is what Benjamin Netanyahu, the genocidal maniac at the head of Israel's Knesset, the prime minister of Israel. I'm not going to read all of the joke Israeli accounts. I'll just go to the video and react to this. This is what he had to say in response. Basically, we will continue. This is an abomination. Here we go.
Israel's commitment to international law is unwavering. Equally unwavering is our sacred commitment to continue to defend our country and defend our people.
So Israel's commitment to international law is unwavering, and yet Israel has violated essentially almost, if not every single article of international law with regard to the rules of war, bombing hospitals, bombing schools, bombing refugee camps. This is just, this is just typical Netanyahu and typical Israel.
Like every country, Israel has an inherent right to defend itself. The vile attempt to deny Israel this fundamental right is blatant discrimination against the Jewish state, and it was justly rejected. The charge of genocide leveled against Israel is not only false, it's outrageous, and decent people everywhere should reject it. On the eve of the International Holocaust Remembrance Day,
there we go again. You have Mr. Netanyahu in Israel evoking the Holocaust as a justification for what it is doing in the name of self-defense. But we all remember how Mr. Bernard Shaw, the lawyer, the British lawyer that was defending Israel, he couldn't even keep his papers together in order to make the case in defense of Israel, essentially metaphorically and behaviorally showing that Israel has no case. Israel cannot defend its position because the writing is on the wall. 30,000 plus Palestinians have been killed, thousands of homes, buildings, hospitals, civilian infrastructure as a whole in Gaza completely ruined, more than 1 million, almost 2 million people displaced. The writing is on the wall. This is a targeted campaign. It is a genocide. They said it as much. The court keeps and continuously states Israel's officials like Yoav Gallant, the defense minister, all of his statements targeting Palestinian civilians, the president of Israel talking about how no civilians are innocent. All of this is to say that Israel's case is absolutely non-existent here.
I again pledge as Israel's prime minister, never again. Israel will continue to defend itself against Hamas, a genocidal terror organization. On October 7th, Hamas perpetrated the most horrific atrocities against the Jewish people since the Holocaust, and it vows to repeat these atrocities again and again and again. Our war is against Hamas terrorists, not against Palestinian civilians.
Again, Palestinian civilians have absolutely been the target because we can't even get good numbers. They say a third of Hamas fighters have been killed, which is a stunningly low number, even if true, during the throughout the duration of this conflict, or I should say, the latest iteration of Israeli aggression. Only a third since October 8th or 9th, or whenever they started their genocide operation. And yet 30,000 civilians have been killed. So their war is not with civilians, yet Palestinians have been murdered en masse, which led to this genocide convention trial in the first place. This is just typical hand-wringing, pearl clutching. Netanyahu and Israel are really under fire. This is why this is important. This is why this case is important, because it just continuously not just exposes Israel as if it needs more exposing, but it also signals, I think, a sea change in how the world, and especially the institutions that supposedly govern this world, although we know that international institutions are generally governed by a particular minority section of the world in the West. But even these institutions are now compelled to come out against Israel, which will have long-standing effects that will lead to, I believe, Israel's end, its defeat.
We will continue to facilitate humanitarian assistance and to do our utmost to keep civilians out of harm's way, even as Hamas uses civilians as human shields. We will continue to do what is necessary to defend our country and defend our people.
So that's a very typical Israeli response. I mean, that's basically been their line from the very beginning, claiming that the only reason they're killing all of these people is because Hamas is using them as so-called human shields, when we've known now, and now we know, that Israel is actually using their own hostages as human shields, essentially killing them, bombing them, and putting them in harm's way by continuing to keep them, to keep thousands upon thousands of Palestinians in prison without charges, and continuing this onslaught, because this would end very quickly if those prisoners were released, if the Palestinian prisoners, if Israel made real commitments to stop desecrating historic and religious sites, if Israel would begin the process of actually acknowledging Palestine's existence and its right to a Palestinian state and a Palestinian nation, all of these things would basically end all of this. And of course, the hostages, so-called hostages, the prisoners of war on the Israeli side, would be released tomorrow if one or some of these terms, or all of them, were met. And none of them are outside of the realm of international law itself. International law says the Palestinian state should be established. It's never been followed, but that's what it says. There are many resolutions, dozens of them, talking about the 67 borders, talking about ensuring that Palestine does become a nation. That is China's position. That is Russia's position. This is not out of the realm of possibility, but yet it has been rendered impossible because of Israel and, of course, because of the United States. The geopolitical implications of this are going to be massive. We already know what's happening around this case. So as this case has been deliberated, as this case has come out, we know that the regional situation, the global situation around this conflict is only intensifying. We know that at the Lebanon so-called Israeli border, Hezbollah and Israel are intensifying their struggle as Hezbollah comes to the aid of Gaza and attempts to divert military resources away from that operation. We also know about Yemen's heroic stand in the Red Sea and how Ansar Allah is causing what is going to be a months-long crisis, if not more, there, which will eventually, if we thought Europe was devastated now because of sanctions on Ukraine, or sanctions on Russia via the Ukraine conflict, then we haven't seen anything yet, given that much of Europe's energy goes through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, and that much of the container traffic that is so necessary for global commerce also goes through the Red Sea. So Yemen is not going to stop. All of the major Western mainstream media outlets are talking about it like this. And that means there's going to be a cataclysmic economic crisis coming unless this is resolved. And that was the hope for many of these economists, many of these investors, many of these folks in the West who are either following or directly involved in commerce, have all said, well, this isn't a problem yet, but it will become one very soon. So that's continuing. We hear reports of a potential U.S. ship being downed by the Houthis, by Ansar Allah in the Red Sea. And these attacks are going to keep on coming. And then you have the Islamic resistance in Iraq, in Syria, basically forcing the hand of CENTCOM, the Central Command, U.S. Central Command, into discussing withdrawals from both countries. You have Iraq's prime minister calling for the withdrawal of U.S. troops in Iraq. You have the Biden administration, contemplating a potential withdrawal of U.S. troops from Syria. Now, I don't know when or even if these developments will occur. But the reason why they are even occurring in the first place, why they're even being considered at such a delicate moment for the Biden administration, given that we are just less than a year away from the 2024 elections, is because of the pressure that has been placed on the Biden administration by the regional forces, the axis of resistance in support of Palestine, and also the people of the collective West in the United States who have stood up against the genocide. All of these forces coming together to place pressure on the United States has led to them reconsidering how they are going to deal with their affairs, their illegal affairs in the Middle East. So this conflict has already had huge ramifications geopolitically, and the fact that a BRICS country is now coming into the forefront as a leader in this very important realm of information and public relations, spreading on the world's court, the International Court of Justice, the message of solidarity with Palestine, and having that court rule in favor of what South Africa is doing is indeed significant. There are moments in history that we don't always recognize are significant until the outcome much later. Israel is disintegrating as a legitimate political entity. It has already demonstrated what it is, what it hopes to do, what its interests are. These were not a secret before October 7th, 8th, 9th. It was not a secret that Israel had plans to essentially ethnically cleanse and eliminate the entire Palestinian population. They mowed the lawn, they displaced, they continued the settlements, all of these things. The siege on Gaza, the blockade, that isn't necessarily new, although it's much tighter now. All of that was a slow rolling ethnic cleansing project, a slow rolling eradication project, a genocide. Now that Israel has accelerated the process in its onslaught on Gaza, now it finds itself in a very delicate position, one that could not have been predicted before this. Israel has been the golden child of the collective West, first the British and then the United States. This golden child, this military outpost in West Asia, was supposed to be infallible and untouchable. Its expansionism was supposed to be controllable, meaning that there were not going to be conflicts between US interests, Western interests, and Israel. Well, now we're seeing all of these fissures, all of these cracks, all of these contradictions emerge, which point to the fact that Israel is not a golden child. It is an illegitimate, spoiled child that is now out of control. I liken it to a dog that has been either not trained at all or ill trained. And now that dog is on its own, meaning it is doing what it wants to do. It is going after every single living being as a potential threat to its existence. It cannot see otherwise. But the difference between a dog and Israel is that most of the time when dogs are aggressive in this way, they are actually afraid. They are actually in their instinctual capacities and in their mind afraid of things that they shouldn't be afraid of. Israel, on the other hand, is not afraid of anything. Israel is much worse than a dog that has been ill trained. Israel is actually doing this on its own volition, on its own accord, pursuing its own interests. And that is, I believe, what is being completely exposed. And there is no more empathy or sympathy, and there's no more Holocaust revisionism or anything that can pull Israel out of the hole it has dug itself. And that includes worldwide. This is a worldwide phenomenon. This is going to have ramifications for Israel and also for the United States and for Germany, a joke of a country, and the rest of the collective West. They are going to have to answer the call. Biden is already having to answer this call every time he goes out there from his constituents, but why they so dutifully support this massacre. And that is also going to continue to damage the US's global standing, the West's global standing, and strengthen that of the multipolar world. BRICS is leading this charge. BRICS is leading the charge of support for international justice, for international law, It's no clearer than here in the Gaza situation. And you also have countries that are not really considered in the multipolar world, but are, like Yemen, which are showing that they are aligned with Russia and China. They are aligned with the Palestinian people. They're letting Russia and China use the Red Sea for their commerce because they have decided, Russia and China have, that they're not going to use the Red Sea to aid Israel. They weren't aiding and abetting the genocide already, but they're not also going to go against what Ansar Allah is doing. It's a really beautiful thing to see, and it shows that the world is indeed changing dramatically. It is changing dramatically. Ask me 10 years ago if I thought Israel was going to be is going to be led into the International Court of Justice and given such a verdict, and I would have said, absolutely not. Israel bombs Syria all the time. Israel is wreaking havoc in the region, and Israel was absolutely unhinged 10 years ago with regard to its dealings with Palestine. I would have said no. Israel is untouchable at this point because the United States protects it. Well, U.S. protection isn't what it used to be. The world has changed, and indeed, this is a historic ruling, and we will continue to follow this matter as developments emerge, as this case continues to move toward a final verdict over genocide. And at this point, it is quite clear that Israel is guilty and that its time is fast dwindling. Its time is fast coming up.